This is the
Five Stars
podcast.
Let me talk to you.
Hi.
So, what do you guys want to talk about? Tell me when I'm telling lies.
Thanks, guys. Back to you.
Happy Friday, all. We are here to reconvene for some classic wrestling talk on the Five Starr Wrestling Report. As I noted on Monday, I've got some pretty big adjustments in my life that I'm currently going through and hoping it works out for the better. And at the same time, I'm trying to keep a good balance between the work life and the personal life. We made a lot of progress on this channel in the past few years, going back and talking about some of the greatest periods of territory and regional wrestling from the 80s. And we made it through the crooked years of NWA World Championship Wrestling. And right now I'm just trying to see how things shape up in the next 8 to 12 months. But for the time being, we're going to roll with how we've been doing things here on Mondays and Fridays. Today's going to be a fun episode as we take a look at the 6th Clash of Champions event. If I can say it correctly. Clash of Champions. Indeed. It is the 6th Clash event that WCW held on TBS back on April 2nd of 1989. And we'll also talk about Midsouth and World Class as well. Staying true to form there. Make sure you subscribe, comment, and like if you have not already. We are here on Mondays and Fridays to bring you a wide range of classic wrestling coverage. The Five Starr Wrestling Report is the wrestling channel that nobody knows but everybody needs. I think I need this more than anything to balance out my sanity. As always, I appreciate the new and returning subscribers that come back to watch the show every week. Still got several more weeks of mental preparation before I have to talk about WrestleMania 41. More specifically, how I'm going to go about reviewing that show. I'm aiming to have everything uploaded and edited by Monday morning. I make absolutely no promises. The one thing I've learned as I've gotten older, a very wise quote from a successful entrepreneur that I've followed on YouTube for the last 5 years. Under-promise, over-deliver. In other words, do the opposite of everything AEW does. But we're not here to talk about Tony Khan's vanity project. We're here to talk about NWA. I'm going to get a better perspective on this Clash event from the Superdome. Now, when it comes to the Clash of Champions 6, I've already covered some of the background on how disastrous this show was when it aired on TBS. We talked about the George Scott thing. Him not wanting the company to promote the event because he thought it would hurt the house show attendance when they were already running back the Flair and Steamboat matches. And we talked about them running the Superdome during a time when business didn't do particularly well in New Orleans. And that was reflected in the attendance figure for this event. I mean, the show did a little over 5,000 at the gate, which might not seem that bad on the surface, but when you compare it to the last several years when they had run the Last Stampede in Midsouth, I mean, they did like 20,000 or whatever the figure was for the Superdome show. Whole different ball game by this point in 1989. Now, the one thing we didn't talk about, and I don't even know how I failed to mention this, they ran this Clash event up against WrestleMania 5, in the hopes of driving away people from ordering the WWF pay-per-view, figuring they would basically be getting a pay-per-view quality show for free on television, using loose air quotes around pay-per-view quality, because, well, fuck, look at the card they gave us. In any case, it didn't pay off the same way it did last year when they ran the first Clash in Greensboro up against WrestleMania 4. Different time, different venue, different type of audience. This just didn't work. The biggest thing that hurt them was the lack of promotion. That was a complete bonehead move from an executive standpoint. Like, even if they subconsciously knew they weren't going to draw well in the Superdome at this point, the fact that they were so dumbstruck when the ratings came in and they realized that nobody watched the show, like, what do they think was going to happen? I mean, you take away the main event between Flair and Steamboat, you're basically left with a subpar spot show card that would barely suit the middle of bumfuck Georgia. No wonder the rating did horribly. And they booked a full card with 8 matches. 2 if you count the dark matches. Granted, 3 of them had to be cut for time purposes because they only had a 2-hour block of television time. We had a World Tag title change where Mike Rotunda and Steve Williams beat the Road Warriors to win the belts. A title change that I do not recall ever happening. There was also a Ranger Ross Iron Sheik match that they mercifully spared us from having to witness. I mean, it only went 2 minutes, but still would have been 2 minutes way too long in my book. Another key part of the show, they brought in a bunch of former promoters to see the show live. So you had Sam Muchnick, Gene Kiniski, Pat O'Connor, Terry Funk was there, Dory Funk Jr. was there. I think Harley Race was there. So you look at that and you're like, damn. They must be pulling out all the stops for this card. And then we saw the card. Well, let's just start from the top. The opening match is the Midnight Express taking on the Samoan SWAT team. This is the period I properly coined Midnight Purgatory. The once popular main event tag team that helped to draw record business at the height of Crockett Promotions in the summer of 1986 have now been relegated to curtain jerking against a team that's barely been in the company for a month. And they wind up doing the job. This is such a frustrating period to be a Midnight Express fan. You know, especially with us having reviewed their peak performance work in the last 3 to 4 years, knowing they're about to go out there over the next year to work their asses off only to get undercut every step of the way. And it's a shame, too, because while I never really thought the Midnights had great chemistry with the Samoans to begin with, this wasn't a bad match at all. In fact, omitting the 2 out of 3 falls match, this was easily the best match on the entire show. I think the fairest assessment I can make about it when I review a match like this, it's Bobby and Stan trying to work a style of match that didn't really complement their strengths. I think it'd be one thing if it was a heel Midnight Express going up against a babyface Samoan SWAT team where the Midnights could bump and sell for Samu and Fatu the whole time. You know, treat it like a Midnight versus Road Warrior feud from a couple years back. But because Samu and Fatu are so green here, there were a lot of moments in this match where you could tell Bobby and Stan were having to walk them through spots. It just, I don't know. I don't think it ever really reached the level of what the Midnights were capable of doing with teams like the Road Warriors or the Rock and Roll, the Fantastics. I mean, even Barry Windham and Ric Flair. You know, this is more Bobby and Stan having to slow things down to accommodate the Samoans. again, while it wasn't bad, it just didn't have the traditional Midnight Express big match environment. I mean, they did a lot of back and forth with both teams controlling the pace of the match throughout. I thought Bobby in particular did a great job selling as the babyface in peril. And we've talked about Bobby on the TBS show lately. He was in a lot of physical pain at this point. I mean, you never know it based on the way he worked the match. But you can tell he hasn't been 100% for a while. So Stan was in there doing a lot of the comeback flurries once he got the hot tag. And again, the last several minutes were really damn good. You know, they did this spot where the Midnights try to ram the Samoans' heads into each other. But of course, they're Samoans, so it's ingrained into their biology to never sell headbutts. We had the deal where they try to restrain Bobby so that one Samoan could go up and do the double axe handle. But then Bobby moves, so they end up colliding with each other. And the Midnights kept firing back. They had a visual pin on the Samoans at the end after they hit the rocket launcher. But as Tommy Young was distracted trying to get Stan back on the apron, I think it was Samu that hit the ring with Paulie's telephone, and he clobbered Bobby over the back of the head with it. So the Samoans steal the win. And it did admittedly kind of take the air out of the room when the Samoans went over. Not the kind of heat where the people were pissing and shitting on the idea that the heels stole the match. I think it was more of that droning, aggravated type heat. Like, oh, come on, seriously? I think the other problem, and again, this is just me kind of speaking as a fan. It's not to say any of this is factual evidence. But when you look at the feud between the Midnights and the Samoans, the actual heat in this story is more so about the continuation of everything they previously started with Paulie and Jim Cornette. I mean, the only reasons the Samoans are a part of this thing is that Paul needed another tag team after they canned the original Midnights thing. Unfortunately, this is really the only thing the Midnights have to work with for the time being until they kick off the stuff with the new Freebirds over the summer. Another program that I know JC wasn't too fond of being a part of. And for good reason. Especially with fucking Road Warrior Garvin overtaking everything. So up next we had the Great Muta taking on Steve Casey. And they actually did refer to here as Muta. So I think they dropped the Mota name. You know, while I was watching this match, I was trying to figure out who Steve Casey closely resembled to me. He was like a hybrid between Lex Luger and Stan Lane if you morph the two together and you remove like 99% of the charisma. He facially looked like Stan, but he had Luger's physique. It's kind of creepy. So, well, first and foremost, the crowd sucked for this match. The Louisiana fans just didn't get the Great Muta. He was the wrong guy to try to feature for this market. I mean, looking back, historically speaking, Japanese talent never particularly got over in the Mid-South area, even as heels. See, Masayo Ito is the most recent example. I mean, he even broke out the green mist spot for this thing. People still didn't care. At least it was the less lethal of the two mist colors. As Gary Hart would say, if it's the red mist, the shit's on, brother. There was a point in this match where JR had mentioned in passing the similar styles between Sting and Muta in terms of their high-flying ability and risk-taking. And then he just nonchalantly adds, oh yeah, Sting's going to defend his TV title later today, by the way. To which I noted, oh, he is now. Sting is the new television champion, you say. Well, that is breaking news to me. Just brought it up like he was talking about the morning weather. Kidding aside, I was already well aware that Sting ended up beating Mike Rotunda at some point to win the TV title. I just love how passe JR was about it. I mean, it's a good little showcase match for Muta that just didn't really work for the Louisiana crowd. Steve Casey made a short comeback at the end, but got cut off trying to go for a dropkick attempt. Muta took him out to the floor, ran him into the guardrail, gave him a springboard back elbow. Then he threw Casey back in and gave him the moonsault off the top for the 3. A very athletically impressive match that unfortunately was booked for the wrong kind of fan base. It's about as positive a critique as I can give it. And then we come to a match that... honestly, there's really nothing good to say about this at all. And that really sucks too, because in an ideal world, you're in New Orleans, you have the history between JYD and Hacksaw Butch Reed. This is the kind of match that would have flourished on a Mid-South Superdome card like 5 or 6 years prior. But now you fast forward in the timeline. It's 1989. New Orleans had all but effectively been killed as a market to draw for wrestling by this point. You have a very fat, out-of-shape, unmotivated JYD. He's got the world's worst bald spot. Worse than John Cena's. And Butch Reed's good, but... he's not somebody that's really been used as a main event guy in the NWA. And while I can't say the dog wasn't over like God, it's New Orleans. Of course the dog was going to be over like God. It was not the JYD that was working the Superdome in 1981, 1982, or 1983. He was already blown up by the time he danced down to the ring with the street band. This was, without a doubt, Hacksaw Butch Reed versus the Junkyard Dog in 1989. It was slow. It was plodding. The longer it went, the worse Dog looked. Reed tried here, but he wasn't Bret Hart in terms of being an in-ring mastermind. I don't even think it's fair for me to try to criticize how bad the Dog was here. Go watch any tape of JYD working matches for the NWA in late 88, early 89. He was as bad here as he was coming off the WWF run. The greater offense here is that they try to have him go 10 minutes in a singles match, as opposed to doing a 3-minute squash like they do on television when he's hidden behind Michael Hayes as a tag partner. Yeah, this is just sad. Reed hit a flying shoulder block. Dog got his foot on the rope. Matsuda tried to distract Teddy on the apron. Reed and Dog did a very clunky-looking shoot-off spot where Reed accidentally bumped Matsuda. Then Dog just sort of fell on top of Reed and pinned him. I forget how much longer the Dog's around. I'm pretty sure he ends up leaving the NWA by the early summer. I know there's another event coming up where he's initially booked for the card, but I think he wound up no-showing. Then they fired him. Then he doesn't return until sometime next year, where he somehow wound up coming back looking more physically out of shape than he did here. If you can believe that. Alright, so real quick, I gotta talk about this. Someone with more expertise knowledge on the subject can look it up for me. Does anybody remember what the deal was with the Bob Orton-Dick Murdoch match that they totally scrapped from airing on the show here? I remember reading about this years later. Apparently George Scott had brought back Cowboy Bob Orton Jr. for the show in some kind of one-off appearance. He booked him in a match with Dick Murdoch, and it apparently lasted somewhere in the range of 20 to 30 seconds. And I'm trying to figure out why something like that would even get booked. Other than George Scott being a mark for 70s wrestling and thinking that he was going to get prime Cowboy Bob in 1989. Like, the fact that they left this off the show. Was the match that bad? Or was it literally due to time constraints? Either way, it's funny to me because, I mean, what the hell was 30 seconds of airtime going to matter in the grand scheme of things? I've only seen the network version of this before. If somebody knows what the story is behind that match, please let me know. Because I find it oddly amusing. They were so pressed for time, they couldn't air a 30-second match where they bring back Cowboy Bob for a one-off appearance to go over Dick Murdoch. Tell you the truth, I'd have rather seen that than this fucking Varsity Club versus Eddie Gilbert Rick Steiner match. Let me be more specific here, because I already brought up that Rotunda and Williams had beaten the Road Warriors to win the World Tag titles. The match they didn't air. This was the other half of the Varsity Club that were going after gold. It was for the U.S. Tag titles. Kevin Sullivan and Dan Spivey. And already you see the problem. 3 of the 4 participants in this match were competent workers. The other guy was Dan Spivey. Therefore, anytime Spivey was involved in this 4-minute match, it sucked. And it was, in fact, that blink and you miss it short. I mean, they were already running low on time when they aired the original show in its entirety. So they probably got an early go-home cue and said, you got 4 minutes. Make it quick and get your shit in. So they jumpstart the babyfaces before the bell. They immediately go to the heat where Gilbert's selling and getting double-teamed. Spivey was horrible in this match. And then Steiner made a brief comeback at the end. There was some chaos where Sullivan broke up a pin attempt and got into it with Gilbert. Steiner and Spivey took a bump out to the floor while Gilbert snuck in from behind and clobbered Sullivan with Missy Hyatt's Gucci bag. And that is how the babyfaces retained. So the babyfaces cheated to win. I'm pretty sure, like, at least 80 to 85% sure that Kevin Sullivan wasn't even the legal guy when Tommy Young counted the 3. If Sullivan was the legal guy, I completely missed the point where Spivey tagged him back in. And because the whole thing was so damn short, it was impossible to really get into it because everything was so breakneck pace from start to finish. I mean, the heels did try to get some of their heat back afterwards by jumping Eddie Gilbert and going after his eye. Sullivan taped up his wrist and started punching him in the face. But, yeah, this is another match in the card that just didn't work. Really no other way to bluntly put it. It was 4 minutes. The action was very clunky. And the babyfaces had to use a gimmick behind the ref's back to cheat the win. So I didn't get the booking there at all. I mean, I enjoyed the original tape they played on the Superstation last week when we saw Steiner and Gilbert beat Williams and Sullivan to win the belts in the first place. Because that was a great match. This was, not that match. But let's be honest. This Clash event is really only saved by one thing. The glue that held it all together. It's the 2 out of 3 falls match for the NWA World's Heavyweight Championship. Ricky Steamboat defending against Ric Flair. The rematch from the Chi-Town Rumble back in February when Steamboat pulled the upset of the decade, defeating Ric Flair clean as a sheet in the middle of the ring to win the gold. And the story on television's been all about Flair trying to disprove that Steamboat is the better man. He's been irate. He's been bitter. And now it's Steamboat's chance to shut the Nature Boy up for good and prove that the Chi-Town Rumble wasn't a fluke after all. And I think I discussed this a little bit when we talked about the Chi-Town pay-per-view back in February. Out of the 3 matches these two had in 1989, I think I still always prefer the original Chi-Town title match. The Chi-Town one was hard to top. It was damn near picture perfect as a main event title match. I think the 2 out of 3 Falls match is probably my second favorite of the 3. And it's been a long time since I've gone back and watched the whole thing from start to finish. To me, it's always interesting when you go back and rewatch classic matches after a period of time. You sort of get different perspectives on things. You see and remember things a lot differently. I mean, we talked about it with the Iron Man match between Shawn and Bret for WrestleMania. We'll get a chance to review that next week when we do the WrestleMania 12 review. People have gone back over time and rewatched the Iron Man match, talked about how it was good for the time, but it doesn't really hold up by today's standards. I think we can sort of judge that for ourselves based on how we quantify a good professional wrestling match. The problems you're always going to run into with longer matches are how patient you are when it comes to pacing and longevity. I mean, you got Steamboat and Flair slated to go about 55 minutes, so you know it's going to take a little bit to get going. And if you can kind of take the ride with them and keep your attention span from waning, I know that's hard for a lot of people in my generation to do. This is still a tremendous match. Obviously, one of the bigger takeaways from the whole segment, not even directly related to the match itself, it was Terry Funk sitting in at ringside as the guest commentator with JR. And if you know where they're going in the lead up to Wrestle War next month, this is great foreshadowing. I've always had a hard time buying super white meat babyface Terry Funk, even when I know where it's all going. Him out there doing his best Tony Khan impression and talking about how great everything is and just being a complete mark for Flair and Steamboat the entire time. It's totally authentic, but at the same time you're like, God, this is so cheesy. But I thought he and Jim did a great job together. That's the best form of commentary you can get to call a match like this. 2 babyfaces calling the action right down the middle and not getting in each other's way. Knowing when to pick their spots. It's virtually impossible for me to sit here and go move for move just because of the fact that there's so much detail to cover. I mean, but this worked exactly how you would expect a Flair Steamboat near Broadway to go. First fall was all about trying to gain the leverage. Both guys trading a lot of chops and hard-hitting offense. I mean, the pace was relatively quicker because they hadn't already settled into working body parts by this point. And as they closed into the 20-minute mark, you come up on the first fall where they traded a series of small packages until Flair was able to cradle Steamboat and hold him down for the 3. So now you go into the second fall knowing Steamboat's behind the 8 ball. So he's fighting on the offensive now. And that worked incredibly well as he started working over Flair's back and trying to stay on top of him, going after the knee. And all of a sudden, Flair's playing defense, trying to avoid and beg off from Steamboat at every turn, trying to slow the pace down. This was the match that truly cemented Tommy Young as the greatest referee of all time. People need to watch Tommy's performance in this match to get a true sense of what great officiating looks like. I like Earl Hebner, but he's got nothing on Tommy Young. Not even fucking close. And the second fall continues until well over the 30-minute mark, when you finally see Steamboat grab Flair and pick him up in the chicken wing submission hold. which is a move that becomes vital by the time he gets to the finish of the third fall. And so Flair submits, and it evens up the score 1 apiece. By this point, these guys are sweating and running on fumes. They've been out there for well over a half hour. Still got another 20 minutes to go. So they're trying to pace this without totally blowing themselves up. Not that Flair ever gets blown up. The guy was fucking disgusting when it came to his cardio. But I'll tell you, man, that third fall was all about showcasing Steamboat's selling ability. When Flair is working him over on the mat, getting him trapped in the figure four, Steamboat's flailing his arms around, selling it like he's on the brink of death. I mean, that's when the people really came alive and realized they were witnessing a classic. You had the great series of near falls as we get into the final 10 minutes. People are coming up for every pin attempt. Poor Steamboat's out there on rubber legs, just brilliantly selling the damage that Flair had done to his ankles and knees earlier in the match. And it's back and forth with both guys. Flair goes for one last-ditch effort at the top rope dive. But we all know how that ends for the Nature Boy. So Steamboat press slams him to the mat. And we get this great finish where Steamboat tries to pick up Flair for the chicken wing again. And he beat him the first time via submission. So now he's going for broke. But he doesn't have enough gas left in the tank. The legs give out at the very last second. And as Flair comes down on top of Steamboat with his arms still grapevine behind his back, Tommy Young counts the 1, 2, 3. Not realizing that Flair's right foot was under the bottom rope well before he had counted Flair's shoulders down. And it was one of those subtle moments where if you're actually paying close attention, I think JR may have accidentally jumped the gun on commentary. Because at first he notices Flair's foot under the bottom rope before the actual finish was counted. But then he tried to play it up during the replay that he couldn't tell. Because they're showing it from the angle where you can't see Flair's foot. But then they show it from the opposite angle and you see Flair's foot was under the bottom rope well before Tommy actually counted the pinfall. So that was kind of a whoops moment. But this was awesome. They stay on the footage for a little bit and do a nice job milking the controversy, treating it like a real sports event. We get the post-match interview where Ricky and JR are watching the film again. And even though Ricky's trying to play it up like, yeah, I proved to Ric Flair again that I'm the better man. I'm going to go seek out better competition because Flair's had his chance. And then he sees what actually happened and he's like, oh shit. Guy's got a case for a rematch now. So yeah, I never have enough good things to say about this. Never heard a bad review of it. I think it's universally agreed upon that it's still a 5-star classic. Although by the Dave Meltzer scale of today's standards, I don't know. Might be more like 2.25. Maybe we should ask Will Ospreay if it meets the 5-star threshold. Since he's apparently the gold standard when it comes to 5-star wrestling matches anymore. It was just a damn shame that the afterbirth of the show was really the only thing that people still talk about to this day. The fact that it did a horrible rating because nobody fucking watched it live. I don't understand how they could have screwed the pooch that poorly. I mean, like we mentioned last week, the only good thing to come out of it was that it was the catalyst that prompted George Scott being fired, which in place gave them a real booking committee. Granted, it's not like the show instantly turned around the minute George Scott was taken out of there. It took a lot of rebuilding to get the product back up to where it would eventually be by the fall of '89, when business was actually looking quite promising for several months. And then Flair quit the booking committee. And it all went to shit. Unfortunately, we're still in that period where Jim Hurt's calling most of the shots, which is how we're going to get the ding-dongs and fucking Norman the Lunatic in the not-so-distant future. It's not all sunshine and rainbows, people. There's still plenty of bad stuff yet to come. The termination of George Scott is nigh, but there are plenty of dark clouds looming. I know I say it like every week we do Midsouth, but I can't stress it enough. Things are really heating up. What an exciting time to be a wrestling fan. I sound like all the AEW shills that constantly try and promote Dynamite as the greatest thing since sliced bread. The difference between those people and me is I'm actually right. And that's not even a matter of opinion. That's an objective fact. In any case, we've had a lot of new development with the Bill Watts Midnight Express storyline over the past few weeks. And we'll go over all the recap footage here in a sec. We also had Jim Cornette back on color this week, so you knew he was going to have a thing or two to say about the Cowboy situation. Just to quickly note here, too, the other big item of business coming out of last week's taping, we had a semifinal round in the TV title tournament between Terry Taylor and Hacksaw Butch Reed, which went to a time limit draw. As we found out this week, they decided to run it back again and rebook the match to get a decisive winner. Yeah, about that. Did not go according to plan. Now, as far as things go with Watts and the Midnights, Cornette got very impatient listening to JR drone on about trivial matters like the TV title tournament. So he decided to intervene and switch gears so he could put over the Midnight Express and talk about what they did to Bill Watts the other week. Of course, not before replaying the videotape of Cornette getting caked by the Rock and Roll Express during the Midnight's title celebration. As you can imagine, Corny was not too stoked about that. Nor was he stoked seeing the tape of Bill Watts slapping him right across the face. Now, I'm not about to sit here and recap all that footage again. Just go listen to my review of Mid-South Television from 2 weeks ago if you want the full breakdown. I still maintain it's easily the best episode of Mid-South we've reviewed yet. They also replayed the angle from last week where the Midnights jumped Watts during his interview with Butch Reed and left him a bloody mess at ringside. I did have to note here, during the whole opening spiel with Corny and JR, I loved how quickly Corny's expression changed on a dime when they went from playing the footage of him getting humiliated to the footage of him and the Midnights ghetto-stomping Watts into oblivion. He was all hysterical and flipping his lid over the cake incident, him getting slapped in the face. And then the second JR mentions the tape of Watts getting beaten up by the Midnight Express, Corny's sitting there rubbing his hands together with a big evil grin on his face, like a toddler who can instantly shift emotions without even thinking. By the way, the key word to all this, sissy. Just in case you forgot Watts' favorite lingo when it comes to affronting Cornette. Take a shot every time you hear him mention that on the program this week. Now, as far as things go with the aftermath from the beatdown the other week, Watts did an interview with JR to more or less promise to disembowel the Midnight Express without being that unambiguous. And JR even told Corny here, right before they pitched to the pre-tape, while he might think that he's dealing with some washed-up ex-cowboy who can't go anymore, Watts ain't no ordinary animal. He's a fighter, former North American champion, international megastar. And he had some words for Cornette and the Midnights that they ought to consider taking to heart. So we go to the tape and, well, here's what the Cowboy had to say. Talked about how when he retired from the wrestling business, he did so by choice, not by force. He's taken his lumps and bruises over the years, but there was never a time in his career where he wasn't able to look another man in the eye and determine that he was the better man if he lost. But times are different now, because it seems this newer generation have issues settling scores man to man when they don't get their way. They're cheated, scammed. They look for every possible way to make excuses. God, he's referring to the fucking millennial generation. Nothing's changed over the last 30 years. So he turns his attention to Cornette in the Midnights. Talks about how he's been able to keep his temper in check, despite a lot of the heinous things that he's seen in Midsouth over the last several months. With Cornette running his mouth and the Midnights resorting to low-ball means of establishing themselves. He could deal with all that. But it got personal when JC decided to run his mouth about Watts' family. Says that this country was founded on 3 fundamental values: God, family, and country. And he'll be damned if you let some loudmouth sissy come in and try to overtake the Mid-South area. And he's thought about the proper way of getting back for what the Midnights did to him. Fines aren't going to work, because Courtney's mama just buys him out of all of his troubles. And beating him up isn't fair, because everyone knows the fight won the last 10 seconds. There's only one way to settle the score. He wants to humiliate Cornette in such a way that he'll be too embarrassed to ever show his face in public again. And that is going to happen at the Superdome with the Last Stampede. He's got a surprise waiting for JC and the Midnights that they'll never see coming. And that is where I promptly wrote down, I just wet my pants in fear for Jim Cornette. That is how intimidating this was. Corny, you done fucked up. If those signs were suited for television back in the day, I would have expected half the audience to bring signs to the Irish McNeil Boys Club that read, "You done fucked up." What a great promo from the Cowboy, though. And you think about it, too. He never raised his voice. He never hollered. He never let his emotions get out of control. He just looked through Jim Cornette's soul as he delivered the line, "I'm going to make you rue the day you ever decided to lay your hands on me, sissy." Oh, I forgot. Sorry. Have to take a shot every time I hear Watts mention the word sissy. I think I already have liver poisoning. Oh, but there's more. Following up after the break here with Watts and JR at ringside. By that point, Corny had powdered from the commentary table to make a phone call, because he didn't want anything to do with the Cowboy here. And this was good, too, because while, yes, Watts explained that he's got a surprise in store for Jim Cornette and the Midnight Express in New Orleans for the Last Stampede, he didn't directly explain what that big surprise was or what any of it meant. So here we get some insight. He did an interview with JR to basically reiterate his goal by coming out of retirement for one final blow-off. And the goal isn't to beat up Jim Cornette. The goal is to humiliate him publicly. And Watts knows the nature of the game. He's not in the same physical shape he was during his prime years. So he traveled all the way to Waynesboro, North Carolina, out in farm country, to visit a good friend of his. None other than the Junkyard Dog, who, remember, last we saw on television, he'd been pinned by Mr. Wrestling 2 after dropping the North American Championship. And I believe part of that stipulation was that Dog would have to leave Mid-South for 90 days. Which, probably was not the worst decision at the time. Maybe it would have motivated Dog to lift a few dumbbells in his spare time. At least, that was hypothetically what Watts was hoping for. So we go to Dog's property out by the pond, where we see him doing some bicep curls and allegedly training. I think it was more so in the category of him fishing rather than training. But this whole thing was just so great. Poor Cowboy Watts and JR drove all the way up to North Carolina to pay Dog a visit because Watts was hoping that Dog would be able to bail him out of this pickle he's in. He needs a tag partner to help him go after the Midnights. He can't go it alone. And he needs a good friend and longtime partner to stand by his side. Only problem is, Dog's still under a 90-day suspension from Midsouth. And Watts can't wait 90 days for the Dog to come back. Dog was always taught, by Watts and his parents, my word is my bond. He said he'd be out of the territory for 90 days after he dropped the North American title to Wrestling 2. He's not going to go back on his word, even though he really wants to help Watts in this predicament. And as they go to shake hands and look like they're about to part ways, not to mention all that wasted gas mileage of traveling 800-something miles just to get a no from the Dog. But sperm of the moment, as the old cliche goes, JYD has a euphoria moment. He might not be able to help Watts, but he knows someone who can. Someone that's been out of action for a little bit, but he can fit it into his schedule to come team up with Watts to help battle the Midnights. Only one man for the game. Good old Stagger Lee. Now that's a hell of an idea. Dog making those connections. So it appears that we will in fact get Bill Watts and Stagger Lee at the Superdome, taking on the Midnight Express. Glad to see S. Lee can come through at the last minute. And I'll get to the follow-up pre-tape in a sec, but can I just say, when Dog's standing there talking about Stagger Lee, and Bill Watts is trying so hard not to laugh, it's one of those ongoing gags in Mid-South where everybody clearly is in on it, but they're so smart to never actually say the quiet part out loud in front of the camera, babyfaces and heels alike. We all know what the deal is with Stagger Lee, but the fact that they never actually blurt it out on camera and break the fourth wall, so to speak, and that's why the whole thing works so well. It's like Spider-Man. You don't reveal the true identity of the guy under the Spider-Man mask, because then you kill the whole gimmick, and you expose a reality that doesn't need to be exposed. It's the best kept secret in wrestling since the baby doll Dusty Rhodes letter circa 1987. Who was the mystery masked man under the Stagger Lee persona? Frankly, doesn't matter. So we get JR's interview here with Stagger Lee, presumably on his property. And the whole idea behind this is that Lee wants to protect his identity as much as possible, so he wouldn't even let JR interview him unless he was blindfolded, or at the very least standing within reasonable distance from him. So we get this funny shot as JR is trying to feel his way towards Stagger Lee to conduct this interview, and off in the distance you hear Lee's voice. Tells JR he can take off the blindfold and ask his question. I liked when JR noted that he's been traveling for miles to hunt down Stagger Lee, to which I wrote, JR wandered through the woods for miles blindfolded just to hunt down a crazy mask dude. Suspension of disbelief, I know. And we also know the checkered past between JYD and Stagger Lee. And Lee used to beat up Dog and steal his lunch money when they were kids. They ended up getting into money disputes over time. So they're not necessarily on the best of terms. So Stagger's talking about how the Dog won't team with Watts because he knows that he's a much more suitable partner. But once JR explains the situation to him, Stagger tells JR that he can go relay the message to Watts that he'll be his tag partner. But it better come with a decent paycheck. Because Stagger Lee's all about that green stuff. He's not about to get stiffed again like that greedy bastard JYD did to him once upon a time. God, this shit is so goofy, but you know it works. That's the amazing part. You know, it doesn't insult your intelligence to the point where you're like, oh, come on. This is such bullshit. No, it's very tongue-in-cheek. But in storyline, everything makes sense. And just for context, you know, we get the pre-tape dating all the way back to November of 1982 when Stagger Lee first made his debut in Midsouth. God, you want to talk about going way back in the time machine. We reviewed that. That was back when Ted DiBiase was still the North American champion. They were doing the whole storyline where everybody kept trying to unmask Stagger Lee to prove that JYD was under the hood. I think, too, wasn't that when Dog was technically supposed to be suspended for 90 days after DiBiase beat him to win the North American title? You know, so the idea was that if they could prove Stagger Lee was the Dog, then his suspension would get prolonged. But they could never prove it. The Rat Pack failed. And so this all finally culminated with Watts explaining that the match for the Superdome is going to have a special stipulation. When Watts and Stagger Lee beat the Midnight Express, Watts is going to humiliate and shame Cornette by dressing him up like a woman, sticking a baby bottle down his throat, possibly sticking a giant baby diaper on him, which I determined here was a pillowcase with a huge paperclip tied to it. And, something else I'm missing here. Oh yeah, pacifier. And when all is said and done, Corny will be exposed as one big embarrassed fool. I mean, sissy. My bad. Slip of the tongue there. A giant sissy. Take a shot. So yeah, this all rolled. And it was basically half the television program this week. Watts just setting the stage for everything that's about to transpire at the Last Stampede. And what a great way of getting to it. All that detail. You know, man, like, this is just one of those moments in Mid-South where I sit back and think, all this talk I hear about Tony Khan being a huge mark for Mid-South wrestling, the fact that he loves to go back and watch Mid-South tapes, I just sit there and wonder how the hell any of that could possibly be factual. He's either lying through his fucking teeth and doesn't know jack shit about Mid-South wrestling, or he just idly sat there and watched, but never internalized anything because he's so fucking stream of consciousness all the time. Like, if he actually sat back and watched everything and understood what it was that he was seeing, AEW would actually be a watchable product that didn't come off so scatterbrained every week. I'm sorry, I just don't buy any of that crap. I can buy the Tony watched Mid-South tapes back in the day, but I don't buy that he got it. And there is a huge difference between watching something and getting something. It's called comprehension. So anyway, Y'all want to talk about some of the wrestling matches that happened this week? There weren't a lot of them. But we almost had one with Mr. Wrestling, former Mr. Wrestling 2, going up against Magnum TA. It has been decided that he no longer wants to be referred to as Mr. Wrestling 2. He's always been number 1 and wants to be referred to as such. Now, it's important to note, the match was originally supposed to be Mr. Wrestling versus Mike Jackson, but Magnum came down before the match and informed Boyd Pierce that he's taken the place of Mike Jackson here because he wants to see Mr. Wrestling put his money where his mouth is. He's made a lot of promises and accusations about what he would do to Magnum if they stood across the ring from one another. So now he wants to see him try. And we basically get a back and forth here where Mr. Wrestling is talking about how he signed a contract to wrestle Jackson, not Magnum. He never actually referred to him as Mike Jackson, by the way. He kept calling him this man right here. So it's highly probable that he did not even know the guy's name. In any case, he's obviously trying to back down from Magnum's challenge. Magnum is telling 2 that he taught him a lot of things, including slapping him in the face, which Magnum did to Mr. Wrestling twice in this segment. Magnum says that he's nothing more than a coward hiding under a mask. He's not even asking for a title shot. All he wants is to wrestle him and see if 2 can back up all these belittling comments. But instead, Wrestling 2 blows him off and decides, no, I'm not dealing with this right now. So poor Magnum is left in the dust again. He even told Mr. Wrestling that if he beats him, he would leave Midsouth. But Mr. Wrestling still wouldn't take the bait. That's how much of a coward he is. Some North American champion. So at the time of 30 minutes and 29 seconds into this 41-minute program, we finally got the bell to sound for a Hacksaw Jim Duggan Nikolai Volkov match. Mind you, a match that was preceded with a jumpstart attack by Nikolai. But, well, at least we can now confirm we did not go an entire full-length episode of Mid-South without seeing a single wrestling match. So for all the match marks, you can blow it out your ass. Now remember last week, Duggan had been working a match with Masayo Ito, which ended via DQ, and the Russians ran out and tried to choke out Duggan with a hangman's rope. So this precipitated the jumpstart we got this week. And, well, here's everything to note about it. The bell rang to start the match at 30 minutes and 29 seconds. And the bell rang to end the match at 31 minutes and 14 seconds. And we get Crusher Khrushchev and a mystery third Russian hitting the ring for the DQ. I would jokingly make a comment about Vince Russo booking here, but I hate to even refer to Russo and Mid-South in the same sentence. At least these non-wrestling angles were actually good and logical. So yeah, the Russians are beating on Duggan momentarily. And we eventually get the babyface save from the Rock and Roll Express and Terry Taylor. And in the midst of this six-way brawl, Butch Reed tries to pull Taylor out of the ring and run him into the post. And keep in mind, these two are still scheduled for a TV title match this week. But Taylor reverses it, and he posts Reed instead. So he goes down selling his wrist and arm while the babyfaces stand tall. And that all obviously bleeds into the next segment, knowing that Butch Reed is favoring an injury. So what's going to happen now? Oh, real quick, too, just to note the mystery masked Russian here. I don't recall offhand who was under the hood. I mean, you had to figure it wasn't anybody notable, considering they just put him underneath a generic hammer and sickle mask and stuck him in a singlet. It wasn't Jack Victory, I know that. It's always my favorite old school gimmick in wrestling. The totally generic interchangeable mass jobber that they literally just put out there to do jobs or get beat up. I mean, we'll see. I actually don't remember where this is all going in terms of this 3-person Russian team. It's obviously setting up some kind of 6-man with the Rock and Roll Express and Terry Taylor eventually. But I don't know if it goes anywhere beyond that. Getting back to Taylor and Reed. Oh boy. Sorry, I love the fact that the whole theme of the show this week was, hey, y'all want to see some wrestling matches? Well, too bad, because you're not getting any. So Taylor's in the ring waiting for Hacksaw Reed, and you eventually see Reed start making his way toward the ring with his arm in a sling. And he's calling for the match to be postponed until next week, since Taylor threw him into the ring post and damaged his arm. He's in no condition to compete. And then Boyd's telling him, look, dude, you signed the contract. The match is scheduled. You take it or you forfeit. And then the best part of the segment, you hear Butchery go, that's a bunch of crap. I guess crap was permitted to say on television back in the 80s. Christ, nowadays everybody says shit and fuck every other sentence. I don't think anything's off the table by 2025 standards. Now, as it turns out, Butch Reed had other plans here. He had a sling, but it's what was under the sling that almost caught Taylor off guard as he goes to reveal a coal miner's glove, which was basically a giant silver sleeve. Didn't even have spikes on it. And, it's one of those things where he ends up punching Taylor in the ribs a few times, and they do the old Alka-Seltzer gimmick where Taylor starts foaming at the mouth and sells it like he's got broken internal bodily damage. I mean, the whole thing was good, except for the blatant absurdity of whatever in the hell that gimmick was supposed to be that Reed had. Yet again, though, chalk it up to another non-wrestling match on this program. Presumably this postpones the TV title match another week, which, well, you kind of see what they're doing with the story now. That's been the whole theme of this TV title tournament. Prolong it as much as humanly possible. It began during the Ice Age and apparently will now carry over all the way into the new millennia when they finally invent flying cars. I just ought to wonder what Crusher Khrushchev is thinking in all this. Like, he's sitting on the sidelines like, dude, shouldn't I be declared the winner via forfeit by now? This is kind of bullshit. Can't say I would disagree with him. It's kind of stupid. I mean, again, it's a good classic heat angle. I like what they did here. But the whole idea that they just keep putting off the finals by throwing in all these roadblocks. We'll see. Again, I don't remember how they eventually got to the finals of this thing. I just remember Taylor eventually winning the TV title and then losing to Adrian Street via molestation, which I'll cover more in depth when he shows up. it wasn't quite molestation. It was more like making out without Taylor's consent. We did at least round out the program with a good old-fashioned nobody gives a fuck standby. It's Masayo Ito versus Larry Santana, which I can merely sum up in the following sentence. Masayo Ito wrestled a very boring heel match and won with a back elbow. The bell rang to start the match at 36 minutes and 47 seconds into the program, and the bell rang to end the match at 38 minutes and 4 seconds into the program, which brought the sum total of this week's wrestling on Midsouth television to a little over 2 minutes of overall wrestling. That is approximately 120 seconds of in-ring action this week. Not too shabby. I believe Russo still holds the all-time record for booking the least amount of wrestling on a single television program. What was it? Didn't he book a TNA show years ago that had like 90 seconds of overall wrestling in a 2-hour window? And that wasn't even during a time when the non-wrestling stuff was good. So you basically had 90 seconds of mediocre ring action surrounded by an hour of shit. I mean, at least this was 2 minutes of wrestling action surrounded by 40 minutes of good shit. And we did get some closing comments from JR to touch up on the theme of the show from this week. And they also replayed a Bill Watts tribute package to show him wrestling a lot of the top names like Terry Funk and Killer Carl Cox from back in the tri-state area from the late 70s. This was by and large the main focal point of the show. You know, the angle with Taylor and Reed was good, but let's be honest. This show was all about setting up the Last Stampede for New Orleans. And if you can overlook the lack of in-ring content and see the bigger picture of what they're trying to set the stage for in April and beyond, this is a very imperative program. A major needle mover in the Mid-South timeline. I mean, that Superdome show did a record gate. As well as all the subsequent house show dates that they did in between. Jim's broken that down on his podcast numerous times over the years. This is where it all stemmed from. And now that the people know Bill Watts is coming out of retirement to see him get even with the Midnight Express for what they did, you know it's high stakes. You know how serious it is. So all this did was help to boost ticket sales in advance, knowing that the fans were going to see something huge. I mean, the promotion for it was unlike anything the Mid-South fans have seen since, probably JYD and Michael Hayes in 1980? And it's crazy to think how monstrous this whole deal was. And that, ladies and gents, brings us to World Class for the week, with a huge double main event feature. Kinda. And I've got to say, considering the ups and downs with World Class over the last couple years, I mean, we've already reviewed the good, bad, and ugly of this product. Gotta say, this period of 86 is relatively enjoyable. I've liked a lot of the stuff we've been seeing on television since early March. I mean, it was always going to be difficult to bounce back from the Gino Hernandez story, knowing that we never really got any kind of conclusion to the rivalry with Chris Adams. And granted, they are yet again going back to the well with the Freebird Von Erich feud. I mean, if you weren't already sick of that by early 84, well, tough shit, I guess. Because you're getting more of it. But so far, the build to the Parade of Champions on May the 4th has been relatively good. And a lot of what we're seeing right now with World Class, I would say it's kind of like what we talked about with 1987 NWA. Despite how bad things were financially, despite the behind-the-scenes drama going on in the office, the on-screen product never reflected it. They were still dishing out good, exciting wrestling stories and angles on a weekly basis. They had all their big stars relatively intact. I mean, that's sort of where World Class is right now in 1986. They've already withdrawn from the NWA agreement. They've gone through the regional rebranding. We already talked about Gino's unfortunate death in February. Attendance figures are generally down across the board. They're only about to get substantially worse in the coming year. I mean, this is historically not a great period for World Class. But at least they're still trying. That's about the best credit you can give them. So we open the show with a one-man gang going over Jerry Allen in a decent little showcase squash. It's been a while since we've seen the gang on Dallas TV. He'd been working a solo program with Kerry Von Erich when they were still immersed in the feud with the returning Freebirds. Remember, too, he'd broken away from Gary Hart and had the side program going on with the Great Kabuki back in late 85. But he never officially turned babyface as a result. It's always been kind of hard to stay consistent with the gang's booking because he kind of falls into that same category like Bruiser Brody. He's in the territory for a while, then he goes away for a period of time. But he was back this week in a quick little get-over match. So, got to assume they're setting up something for him at Texas Stadium. He beat up Jerry in the aisleway, ran him into the corner turnbuckle a few times, and then hit a big body splash and got the 3. Really not much to add beyond that. We'll see if he somehow makes his way onto the Parade of Champions card in the next month. Then we follow that with a midgets match featuring Little Tokyo and Little Mr. T. I believe this is my first time seeing Little Mr. T. I mean, he was basically a miniature version of Mr. T. He's fucking jacked, too. He was Mr. T if they left him in the dryer for too long. I know that's horrible. I make no apologies. Here's what I found so funny about it. Both of these guys were billed around the 130-pound mark. In 1986, that would easily qualify for midget wrestling status. But you compare that in 2025... I mean, most of the regular or average size guys in the business today are barely 130 pounds. You put either of these two in the ring with Darby Allin, it would be an equal playing field. I'd put my money on Little Mr. T. He kicked the shit out of Darby Allin. I've talked about the lost art of the midget wrestling product in a post-WWE world. It's unfortunately one of those genres or niche styles of wrestling that probably wouldn't get over in today's market. Also, see my comments about average-sized guys in today's business at the top of the card. The majority of them are the size of these guys. Obviously, it's a match designed to be a special attraction. I mean, they're not going to make a full-fledged program out of Little Mr. T and Little Tokyo. At the same time, it does an effective job of giving the people a fun match with some reasonably good comedy spots. Nothing that exposes or kills the business. But the spots where Little Mr. Tokyo sells after the airplane spin... Did I call him Little Mr. Tokyo? Little Tokyo. He hadn't earned the moniker of Mr. That's Mr. T, damn it. But yeah, Tokyo was obviously the heel here, so he kind of hammed it up for the camera. There was a series of catapult spots that Mr. T gave to Tokyo across the ring, and he took a belly splat bump. And that stuff always gets over with the Dallas crowd. Again, though, they're still being serious. Little Tokyo's trying to work the heat throughout the match, choking and gouging Mr. T. T makes the comeback at the end and gets the win with a middle rope splash. I mean, sure as hell beats having to watch Jon Moxley take bumps on fucking nail beds. At least these guys actually look like they could feasibly kick somebody's ass if they wanted to. You put me in a vacant parking lot with the oil mechanic or fucking little Mr. T, I'll hedge my bets I can last longer in a fight with Moxley over little Mr. T. I wouldn't want to fuck around with this dude. He's got muscles in places I didn't even know people had places. But that brings us to part one of the double main event feature on this week's card. It's Terry Gordy versus Bruiser Brody in a good old-fashioned slobber knocker. And we saw the tape of these two at Fort Worth last week brawling up through the crowd to the locker room. And they had announced this week that it was going to be part of the double main event. And I did find it kind of odd that, considering everything we saw with these two brawling in Fort Worth the other week, they just kind of blindly went into this thing and booked a straight wrestling match between Gordy and Brody. Apparently thinking we were going to get a good old classic clean wrestling bout. Yeah, that lasted all of about 0 seconds. They attacked one another shortly after the opening bell. They brawled to the floor almost immediately. Gordy grabbed Brody's boot and started wailing away on him in the corner with it. Then Rick Hazard called for the DQ. At which point they proceeded to brawl up toward the side entrance of the building, wherein I believe Brody essentially shoved Gordy out to the parking lot and locked the door. Then he went back to the ring and took his other boot off so he could put it on his hand and create a makeshift pair of gloves, I guess. And yeah, that was it. We never saw Gordy again. The whole thing lasted less than a minute. But the people went batshit for it, because it's Bruiser Brody. And he got the better of a free bird. Didn't matter that the fans never got a match. They were just glad to see the babyface overpower and run off the bad guy. The way God intended for wrestling to be, man. And they did basically use it to advertise the main event for next week, which, unless they're false advertising again, it will be Kerry Von Erich and Bruiser Brody taking on Michael Hayes and Terry Gordy in a tag match. Sounds fun. So I was fine with this. Yeah, you would probably classify it more of an angle. Truthfully, I don't know what anybody else would have expected. Bruiser Brody versus Terry Gordy in a regular sanctioned wrestling match. It's like putting two bears in a cage and expecting them to shake hands. But coming out of that hoss fight, we head down to ringside for an interview with Bill Mercer and David Manning, talking a little more in depth about the World Heavyweight Championship match for Texas Stadium. And again, the idea here is that the fans are going to get to vote for Rick Rude's opponent by sending in post letters to the office. And I guess David Manning's kind of working the field. So he was here to give us an update on how the fan mail is coming along. Who are the current top contenders that the people are wanting to see challenge Rude for the title? And he brought up a couple names here like Iceman King Parsons, One Man Gang, The Missing Link. God, shoot me now. Fritz Von Erich got a couple votes, believe it or not. They had a good belly laugh about that one. And the basic gist here is, because the Freebirds and the Von Erichs are already scheduled to wrestle in the six-man at Texas Stadium, they are not in title contention. So for the people voting for Kevin Carey or Lance, their votes are immediately being discounted. Same goes with the Freebirds. Interestingly enough, I thought this was notable. I don't believe David ever mentioned anything about Bruiser Brody. Perhaps that was coincidental. Perhaps not. But they still have a few more weeks to send their votes in. I wonder how many people were sending in troll mail. I would have requested Ric Flair, despite knowing about the NWA withdrawal. I'd have told Fritz, suck it up, Buttercup. Bring the Nature Boy back and give him that title shot. He'll sell the whole venue out. Rick Rude versus Ric Flair at Texas Stadium? Could you imagine? God, that would have been electric. Again, without looking it up offhand, I'm assuming it's either going to be the Iceman or Bruiser Brody. God forbid they actually go with the missing link. I think I might chew my own foot off just to avoid having to watch it. But that left us with basically 20 minutes left in the show. And albeit I really wasn't all too enthused about the idea of having to watch Lance Von Erich work a 20-minute match, despite it being a tag. But the main event this week was Michael Hayes and Buddy Roberts taking on Lance Von Erich and Brickhouse Brown. Brickhouse made a good showing for himself the other week in his debut match against Steve Regal. And a week later, he's already part of the main event, wrestling against the Freebirds. How about that? He managed to beat Michael Hayes in the dance-off right before the opening bell. Now we just need to see if he can get a pinfall victory over him. Yeah, as per usual, we had standard Freebird stalling tactics that ate up like the first 5 minutes of action. Brickhouse spent a while working over the Freebirds until Lance tagged in and the heels turned it in their favor. Fans were chanting something at the Freebirds early on in this match, and I couldn't make it out. It sounded like Georgia sucks, but I don't know if that was it. It was something sucks. It was better than the audible chants of "Go Brick, go." Because that would have been more preferable than "Go Brown, go." I don't think that would have aged well, even in Texas. And they end up working over Brickhouse here as well before Lance gets the tag at the end and starts rallying the comeback. And that's where it broke down with everyone at the end. Lance goes to shoot Hayes into the ropes. They do a waistlock reversal where Lance goes to roll up Hayes, but then Buddy sneaks in and tries to pry Lance off by his hair. Then you see Lance go to cradle Buddy in a small package, which, well, it was a blown call by Rick Hazard, because as Michael Hayes stated here after the bell, Buddy was not the legal partner, which is true. Hayes was the legal guy when Lance got the hot tag. So even though it was ruled that Lance and Brickhouse won, the heels had a valid complaint. Because Hayes was 100% correct here. He was the legal guy. But Rick Hazard just looked down and said, "Oh hey, Lance has a guy pinned. I'll count the 3. Wouldn't want to get any heat on myself." So indeed, a tainted victory for the babyfaces. Good match, albeit a bit long. I am continually astonished when I go back and see footage of Lance Von Erich and realize that he was still over at this point. As much as Kevin and Kerry. I mean, the people had to have known, right? The fact that he was a fake Von Erich. Wasn't there a point on television where Fritz recognized that Lance wasn't a real Von Erich? That was probably sometime in like 87. Probably could have run with it as long as they wanted to, but for whatever reason, they had to expose it. And I don't know what led up to that decision. Was it because Lance left? I forget how long he was in Dallas. Was it until 87 and then he quit and went somewhere else? Because at that point, I guess you would have to break kayfabe in order to explain to the people why Lance wasn't around. Such a weird decision. Guess we'll figure that out when we see it happen. Hopefully we get that far. You know, overall, I wouldn't say the show was as good as last week. But it's still relatively good television from an on-screen product standpoint. They seem to have found their temporary sweet spot here in early 86. Now, the momentum obviously is not going to continue through the entirety of the year. But considering the circumstances of where World Class was at this point in history, like I said before, man, it's 1987 NWA. Behind the scenes, it's a total mess. But the stuff you see on television does not reflect that. In any case, because it's going to wrap things up for this one. As always, I appreciate you guys coming back every week to check out the show on Mondays and Fridays. This coming Monday, we will have WrestleMania 12 as well as the follow-up Retro Raw to review, so get ready for a jam-packed, fun weekend. It's going to be jam-packed for me because I got to figure out how the hell I'm going to consume all this wrestling over the weekend to try to prepare for the following Friday show. It's got to be done. And it will be done. But until then, thanks everybody, and talk to you soon. Take care. Peace out.